A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Ankita from NASSCOM, and I'm back with another interesting episode from the product management series. And today's topic, as you all know, is product experimentation. I have with me Shravan Ganguly, AVP, Product Design and Management from Innovative Payment Solutions, to share his knowledge and experience on this topic. You can ask questions anytime during the session. Shravan will cater to them after his presentation. Also, please do not forget to leave your feedback to help me improve my future webinars. Welcome, Shravan, and over to you.
Thanks, Ankita. Thanks, Ankita and NASSCOM for having me here. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I know this is an afternoon session and a post-lunch session at that. So I'll try my best to keep this interesting and engaging. A few things on the housekeeping part. Disclaimer by NASSCOM that goes away in 3, 2, 1. All right. So product experimentation, right? So my goal here today as a speaker here isn't to give you one single method of experimentation, but rather to give you an idea of the entire lay of the land, right? So what I want you to take away from this particular session is what is product experimentation? Why do we need to do it or imbibe it in our product lifecycle? Again, another idea that you would want to take away is product experimentation is not a single thing, but is actually a process. It's a framework that you can actually include in your product lifecycle. And another thing is primarily how you can start with your product experimentation journey. So the idea is to motivate you to start on your own experimentation journey so that you are motivated enough to find resources on your own and hopefully maybe come back offline to me on any interesting tools that you can actually see. Right. So before we kick off, a few things about me. I'm a telecommunication engineer, graduated from PSIT Bangalore back in 2007. I joined Goldman Sachs right after my engineering and stayed there for a good 10 plus years, where I started out as an engineer to becoming a VP product owner. I was managing the multimedia and unified communication technologies for Goldman globally. I thought I actually needed more of a formal education, and I went in to get my MBA from IIMA in 2018. And since my graduation there, I have been working with Innovative, managing the payments and lending space for them. Right. So what is an experiment, right? I know this actually has different connotations for different people. If you ask a layman, he would actually see something like this, right? A guy who is actually wearing a scientist who basically wearing a lab coat, sitting in a lab, and it's all alien to them. But what does it mean for us product managers? What does it exactly mean, right? When we talk about experiment, usually what do we think about? More often than not, we actually think about A/B testing, right? And this is pretty much the latest buzzword that you would see in pretty much everywhere. All the JDs have it that you actually have to have done some sort of A/B testing in your past, right? But say for the uninitiated who do not know what is A/B testing, right? It's simply put, A/B testing is basically a comparison of two variations of something which you capture at the same point in time, and you are basically checking which one performs better, right? So if I say explain it by a simple example, right? You have an idea, a website A, which basically is your control, and that has a call to action button which is actually in red, right? You have an idea that you actually change it to green, it will improve the performance of the button, basically improve the clicks that you actually get on the on your website, and better performance and more people actually act upon that particular call to action, right? So you make the change. What you do is you maintain a variation and a control, send a percentage of the traffic to the control, a percentage of the traffic to the variation, and then you basically see which one actually wins, right? But this is one form of experimentation, and primarily a client-side one where you are testing for, say, optimization, right? Uh, on what actually performs much better, right? So it's one of the favorite tools per se, say for marketeers. They have been using this for ages on how do they actually improve the performance of a particular button. Say, for example, LinkedIn, what they were doing was the connections button was being changed from red to different variations of red until it was actually kind of getting them more clicks on that particular button, right? But when you actually put this in a larger scheme of things, the marketing life cycle where you want a particular promo to actually get more traction is short-lived in nature, whereas the product life cycle is much larger when you think, right? So, because as a product owner, what you want to provide over the longer scheme of things is to provide true value to your customers, right? So, A/B testing, we know it's one of the experimentation that you can actually evolve, but there are different experiments that you can actually imbibe into your life cycle uh, through the journey, right? So if I may, I mean, what is an experiment, right? So we haven't defined it yet. Let's define it a bit more formally. So an experiment is a process that helps us test and validate our hypothesis against specific success criteria. So three items that I've underlined here. So it's a process. It's not one thing, single activity. It's an iterative process that keeps going on and needs to uh, kind of feeding to your weekly, bi-weekly sprints or a monthly sprint, right? It helps us test and validate our hypothesis. So hypothesis will be dwelling into this more. So hypothesis is something that you actually uh, build from your assumptions, which are based on your ideas that you actually get. And the idea is that it has a specific success criteria. So you go into an experiment defining what should be the success criteria and how do you actually ensure that uh, you ensure that you get a result which says that the experiment was a success or a failure against that particular hypothesis, right? So I think we've addressed what is an experiment, right? Why experiment as product managers, right? So as product managers, our need is simple. We need to select what to build and decide what not to, right? You get ideas from everywhere. How do you decide what to build and what not to? So using experiments, you can actually kind of come up with that, wherein you actually get results which will tell you exactly on what you should pursue and what you should not. So, so the idea here is, again, it depends from person to person. I mean, a product manager to product manager on which kind of a company and an organization he is actually at, right? So if you are, say, a product manager who is working in a startup, right? You are crunched for time and money, basically your resources, right? So in a sense that if you're just say a two-member startup and your title may not just be a product manager, but say a co-founder as well, right? So over there, you need to choose a product that you actually want to invest your time and money on. Otherwise, and if you don't choose them right, you might actually die, right? So the company might actually die, right? But compare that to, say, a large organization. uh, the priorities there are much different, right? So over there, it's more about the brand. How do you actually maintain that particular brand, and the opportunity cost of not building something? I mean, of course, you can always argue that we have seen large companies who have not experimented and moved faster, have failed over time, but still they can, with a bad product here or there, they can still manage it, right? And there's also the other aspect to it, right? So say companies, when you take like Google, right? So they are very much into experimentation, and it's common knowledge. You don't need to be a product manager or a techie to see what they've been doing, right? So there was Google Glass, there was Google Wave. All these came out as experiments which had a short lifespan, was tested out in the with the users and died, right? But then when you think of these large companies, they still, I mean, Google, they still were seen as a cutting edge technology firm who was moving the barriers. And that kind of speaks to their brand, wherein they are experimenting and are actually trying to move the barrier there, right? So again, it depends on where you are at as a PM in a large org or a small org, and there's also the bit in between way where we are actually transitioning from, say, a startup to a large org. So like I said, experimentation is a process, and there's a framework that you may actually follow to go through the entire process of experimentation. It's a 7-step thing, right? We will actually delve into more in each one of them. So just to give you a high level, right? So everything starts with an idea. You have a product or a feature that you need to build. You identify assumptions that are based on that particular idea. So any idea will have different assumptions that actually come along with it. You build your hypothesis to test with, which are based on those assumptions. And what is it? So these are basically crafted statements. We'll actually go over it again as well. Crafted statements that you can actually build, and you can measure it against proper minimum criteria of success on how do you actually kind of test it and see whether that experiment is success or a failure. You choose the experiment type. We will be going into some of the examples of different experimentation types that you can actually use, and then pretty much execute, and then go ahead and evaluate and learn from that experiment. And it again goes back. So if say an experiment fails, maybe your assumptions were wrong, or you would want to go back to the drawing board and then again experiment. So it's a cycle that you can actually repeat, or you basically say that this is not a good idea and I need to experiment something new that I actually want to take on. All right, so let's go with idea, right? So everything starts with an idea, and where do they come from, right? So as product managers, one of the things that everybody believes is a product manager is a know-it-all guy who is responsible for coming up with the ideas, and this can never be farther than the truth, right? Uh, in fact, I mean, as a PM role or as a product manager role, your job is not to come up with the ideas. I mean, that can be a good thing that you come up with the ideas, but to rather evaluate and decide on what idea to take up on, and take in as much as ideas that you possibly can. So where do the ideas come from, right? So 4 places that I can probably categorize these as, right? So one is internal. These are your co-workers, your management, your sales guys, your support guys, who would actually be interacting with different touch points of your customer, right? They have a wealth of knowledge, and they can actually feed into your uh, uh, into your product backlog, if you may, right? So and basically feed into the ideas there, right? Second category would be metrics. As a product manager, again, you will be living and breathing data, and there's a lot of things that you can actually come out on. What are the things that you actually need to improve on, and what are the new things that you can go after, right? Third would be users, right? These are your users. You have a feedback form that they actually fill in. They actually call into your support again and log complaints, or say that they actually need XYZ feature. That can actually also feed in as a source. Customer interviews as well as another good example. And customers. So this is primarily, say, in a B2B space where your user of your product is different from the person who is actually paying. I mean, something that we actually operate in here as well. So the customers would be another source wherein they can actually feed in ideas and what you need to do or what you need not to. But you get your ideas, you have your ideas. The 4 categories of people have actually given you the ideas. Now, how do you decide if it's a good idea, right? So if it was Dilbert, I mean, in a Dilbert word, you could do this. You could always say that the ideas that are coming in are all bad, and people will hate you for that. Even otherwise, in the real world as well, people hate you for not going ahead with their ideas. But you can't exactly do this, right? So what do you do, right? What I mean, at least in my experience, what turns out is what you can do is ask questions, right? So I follow what and a 3 why strategy wherein you ask clarification on what is it that they actually wanting to do, and then ask 3 times why. Again, you might actually have your answers much earlier or a bit more 5 times why that you will get it at, but this usually works out, right? So I will use an example that actually we got in uh, from one of the merchants, right? So one of the merchants requested us that they need a custom dashboard to be built, and here are the 10 things that actually need to go into the report, right? So we asked why. What we got was the store manager needs a transaction data on the dashboard. So these, I mean, to give you some background, what I'm talking about is a retail store where the say a supermarket of sorts, right? So where there's a billing POS and there is a payment device, right? So we manufacture these payment devices, and there is reports that actually are required on how many sales was done at the end of the day, right? So we asked them why, and the first question was why. What we got was he needs to be able to match its daily sales with this data. Again, now you're trying to uncover these layers. Why does he need to match this data? I mean, you are already thinking that I have some solution already that I am looking at that we probably have, and it's going in the back of my mind. So what you get is he doesn't have access to the transaction data at the store. You again ask why, and voila, we get to know that there is integration is not set up between the billing POS and the payment system. So when you actually ask why, most of the times you realize that the idea is actually something else, and it's not exactly. So the idea kind of comes in from a solution space rather than from being a problem space. Over here, the merchant was actually pushing us to build a dashboard, but that was not his problem. That was a solution that he was suggesting, right? And the solution turned out to be that we just needed to integrate the billing POS and the payment terminal, and then he would have all the reports that he actually wanted, right? So again, going back onto the process of your experimentation, now we have kind of spoken about the idea piece, right? Moving from idea to assumption. How do you do that, right? I'll again try to come up, address this with an example, wherein say you have an idea that you're a wallet company, right? A mobile wallet company who, sorry, and you have an idea that let's build a mobile application to find the best credit card to use before shopping, right? So many people have different credit cards, and they don't know which credit card to use at the time of the shopping, of their shopping, right, activity. Uh, Now there are different assumptions that are actually loaded in this particular statement here, right? Just listing them down one by one, I mean, not in any particular order, uh, kind of helps you see the picture a bit more clearly, right? So there is a population of people who need this solution. That is a big assumption that you're making, that there is a target population for this kind of a solution that you're suggesting, right? Another suggestion is that it has to be a mobile application, right? You can't build it into something that you already have, or something that is probably more static, or an SMS, right? It has to be a mobile application. And people have a problem of not, there is a problem that exists where they are not, they want to actually know what credit card to use at the shopping. I mean, for all you know, I don't care on what credit card to use, right? So I will carry whatever comes in my hand when I actually open my wallet, right? And then there is another assumption that you can come up with is using a specific credit card actually matters to me, to my customer. As a customer, he actually wants to use specific credit cards to get the most value out of those credit cards, right? Now, again, you can type in multiple assumptions, but uh, the way I think, at least I go about it, is trying to identify the riskiest assumption here on what would actually be the major thing that I would actually, major thing that I'm assuming here that I need to test, right? So you're again, this is based on the experimentation thing, where you want to test out the core assumption to that particular experiment that you actually want to carry out, right? So let's choose this, right? So again, there's a structure. We assume that there is a set of people who want to know the best credit card to use before they shop, right? So that's pretty much an assumption, and you're actually saying there is a set of people. You want to identify who the set of people are. So you will need to kind of go about doing some research and understanding who are these set of people that you would actually have this kind of a problem. That becomes your target segment, and they have this problem pretty much. That is what you're trying to validate here via this experiment, right? Now, choosing what assumptions to test, right? So you can actually club multiple assumptions into one single experiment more often than not. But again, a lot depends on how much time do you want to take for the experiment, and what is the importance or the risk that are actually there. So you can probably chart your assumptions into a quadrant based on importance and risk, and what is the feasibility of doing these particular experiments, right? So the one first place to actually where you would want to start off is primarily say uh, uh, which are riskiest and high feasibility of actually delivering that experiment within the time frame and within the resources that you actually have, right? So it's easy to do, and it is an important experiment and riskiest one to your assumption. You would want to address that first. Then you would actually go to, you have built your confidence on, okay, I have done some experiment, now I want to do some more, and you have the resources for it. You would move to the left of the quadrant there, going with high importance and low feasibility experiments, right? Third one would primarily be a low importance. You don't see it as a riskiest one, but you can actually do it. So that would primarily be a pecking order with which actually you would go about doing your experiments. All right, so now we have got our assumptions, we have identified the riskiest one, we have identified how do we actually want to go about the uh, assumptions on how do we want to rather try out and test out these assumptions. We move to hypothesis, right? So what is a hypothesis, right? In simple words, hypothesis is a statement that is actionable and specific, right? There are a few things that a hypothesis should contain. It should have a target group. Who are you actually testing? This again, like I said, you'll need to do research on who is your target population that you want to address. If you're an established organization, it may be your existing audience who you're trying to test out a new feature. If it is a new product that you're launching, you will need to kind of build on who that particular audience is. Maybe look at industry reports and insights, right? Hypothesis should again have a potential problem that you actually list out as part of the hypothesis. There should be a reasoning on what is the reason you think that this particular idea would work or not work, right? There is an experiment, there is a call to action that you would actually take, and the expected outcomes that you would define through metrics, right? So there's a structure that you can actually kind of largely come up with. So we believe that target group has a potential problem because of so and so reason. If we take this particular action, this metric will improve, right? Again, going back to our credit card idea that we actually had, right? So putting that into as an example. So we believe that retail customers with 3 or more credit cards. So again, you ideally would want to research out on whether people with 3 or more would have. I don't think people who have 1 credit card would have an issue on which credit card to use. 2 maybe, but 3 maybe it gets difficult, right? So I mean, I'm spitballing here a bit, but you will need to kind of do your research on who would actually be a target audience, right? We believe that retail customers with 3 or more credit cards need access to an easy reckoner on the move, because they will actually be on the move going to a store to actually make this purchase. So it has to be something that is mobile, to advise them on the best card to use, as they can't remember. This is your reason, right? So as they can't remember which card gives them the most benefit, right? So that's the idea, that either I'm swiping my card to get the most points, or the best discount that I can actually get on my card. And if we implement a card recommendation feature in our wallet app, the application adoption rate will actually improve. So this is again one of the metrics that we actually can identify, and it's a feature that we are actually say building in our volatile, right? So again, going into the so this is your metric that you actually would want to track, but how do you define your criteria of success, right? So there are again, you can use or target your build your criteria of success. A few things that we use over here is say depending on what kind of a product you're launching and who is it targeted against, right? So one is say with early adopters, right? So early adopters are these enthusiastic folks who actually want to take on the product, give it a spin, and usually are very passionate about that particular product, right? So what you would want to do is that you would also always want to set high standards with early adopters. So the minimum success or fail criteria that you would define should be in upward of 70%, right? The second one said, I mean, you are launching, say, a new product and you do not have a particular metric that you can track, or you are actually launching a new feature in your existing app, right? So you can actually do uh, uh, a study against the industry standards on what these particular criteria be, right? So say if a website, a shopping website should actually get X amount of sales on a daily basis during Diwali, right? So you have those industry standards on how much the typical websites would actually get, and you can work your way backwards to set your minimum criteria of success there, right? The third type that you can actually use, or the third methodology that you can actually use is your back of the envelope calculation, right? So what you would actually want to look at over here is your cost versus benefit calculation. So how much am I spending for this particular product and building it, and what is the potential benefit that I am actually kind of thinking of it, right? So this is again important here because your entire business model might actually be dependent on it, and it needn't always be that the person actually the customer is paying for it, but a derived benefit that you can probably get. So again, if I actually have to go to the minimum criteria of success that I would use for my credit card feature in my mobile wallet, right? Uh, uh, Two things that I would probably look at as of now, right? So to measure that the application is being used every time, that's what I want, right? Before a purchase, and the customer saves the most time every time he uses the app, we will track that the application is used before every purchase 80% of the time. So I'm thinking it's primarily targeted at early adopters here, right? And he should get value out of it. So he should save 5% or more additionally on making the purchase with the recommended card, right? So that is where I would actually see that he would be coming back, right? So my hypothesis here is that I haven't yet put everyone to sleep and folks are listening, so I'll continue. So this is where we are at in our process, in our framework of experimentation, right? So we've gone through the idea, we identified the assumptions, we identified how do we actually go about the assumptions. We have also addressed the hypothesis, how do we go about constructing it, and the success criteria, minimum success criteria, how would you actually kind of identify them, right? Now moving ahead, how do I choose my experiment? What type of experiment, right? So, and then execute and evaluate, of course, right? So some of the experimentation types, which actually kind of goes from no product to a minimal product kind of a setup, right? So this is something that actually from the left end, you will have no customer value. You're not exactly giving any customer value to the customer by building something, but you are just kind of doing an exploratory work, trying to find out the product market fit to actually giving customer value where you are actually delivering a product, right, to the customer that he can actually use, right? So on the left end, pretty much in a B2B space, this works a lot. You do customer interviews or meetings where you show them your wireframes that you actually come up with and get their views. In a B2B, it's easier. The decision maker is pretty much your customer who you're interacting with, and those are the words that you would actually value a lot, right? In a B2C space, email experiment is kind of way down on the pecking order where you're not doing much, right? So what you can do is craft an email and send it to targeted user sets. So if you are a large company and you have a huge user base, you can send emails to only a set population and do it quick, pretty easy, and try out or get some feedback on your product with that particular customer set, right? Again, moving right, we'll actually dwell into more, and I'll give you an example as well. Explainer videos, you could just put up a video on how the particular product or feature would work. Just put it out there on the web, on your website, and see how customers react to it, right? There's a very good example that I'll be referring to. Where actually, I mean, like it's pretty much a cult status on how they actually successfully launched a product with an explainer video and got a lot of signups, right? Uh, Painted door experiment. So this is basically a fake door, right? So you put up a button, somebody clicks on it. What you do is send them to a page where it actually asks them to sign up or say that you're not ready, right? Again, I'll have examples for it. Concierge experiment. So this is again a very high touch kind of an experiment that you can actually run where you are not pretty much building anything. So say you're a large company and you want to try out a new service, right? What you would do is probably pick up the phone call, ask the customer whether he wants to use the service, manually go there and deliver it, and process his request on what you are actually planning to deliver, right? So it's a very high touch engagement. It just can't scale, but you get a lot of qualitative kind of a data, and doing it manually helps out on what is the process that you would actually want to automate, right? Next one is a Wizard of Oz experiment. It comes from the famous Wizard of Oz movie, right? So the idea here is that whatever you expose to the customer, it looks all snazzy and all automated in the sense that you actually have a front end website where the customer comes, places an order, etc. But in the back end, you still do a lot of manual things. You still do not have the automation, you do it manually, but the customer actually sees it that it is all operational and has gone live. Again, moving to the right, it's the single feature product. So you just launch one product, one core feature, which is the major thing that is that you have started out as an idea. Just launch that basic thing and then see how your customers and users react to it. If you go further down, split testing, where I mean, what we actually referred to earlier, or your multivariance testing that you can actually do, where you're actually comparing a product that you already have and a variation that you have actually created now. So let's dive in a bit deeper into email experiment, right? So how do you actually do this? So you send out an email to your customers, something saying that it's an awesome product, would you want to sign up, right? Or pre-order. So you would see a lot of these pre-order emails that, pre-order sign up or pre-order registration. So they're just kind of testing the waters here. Doesn't take much. It's quick, it's easy, it's very cheap to kind of come up with this kind of email experiment. But on the flip side, there is a bit of brand degradation that you would actually might need to be aware of, right? So it depends on who are you and whether email actually, I mean, whether your customers are used to kind of receiving these kind of emails from you. So if you have a email-based marketing, I mean, again, in today's age, it might be say WhatsApp as well, but the theory behind it pretty much remains the same, right? So what are the things that you'll need to be aware of? You got to be, like I said, cognizant of what is your audience expecting out of you, right? So if you're a small startup, you might just get away with sending them email and asking them to sign up. But if you're a large company and you are actually not used to sending emails to your customers, you would want to probably refrain from it, right? The quality of the email should match your production value of your corporate communications, right? So if your marketing team is already sending out emails, you would want to sit with them, spend some time, to come up with these good emails that actually you can sneak in along with the other marketing material that you would actually be sending it, right? So uh, another thing is just an email saying that we are coming up with this. This is a product. Sign up doesn't help. So plan it with a different test. Say you can actually have it as a landing page which gives additional details, has an explainer video behind it, or take information to kind of take a pre-order or say a concierge service, right? So you basically do the rest of the service more manually there, right? Explainer video. So the next kind of an experiment that you can actually run. So this is something that, I'm going to quote an example of what Dropbox did. So they created a small 4 minute, I think, walkthrough video where they just explained on how Dropbox works, right? At their time of where were they actually in the product life cycle? They just had a product that was just had a sync mechanism going from their from the Dropbox uh, to the to the PC and uh, uh, to their systems, right? So what they did was it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. They created a video and put it up online, and they had about 100,000 people watching those videos, about 70,000 people signing up, and a lot of pre-registration that they actually got for this particular video. So this is kind of in a cult status of how you best you do explain a video. There were a lot of funny, geeky things that were actually said in that video that people got engaged and wanted to watch it, and they really liked the simplicity of that particular video. There's also the other side type of videos that you can actually create, which being say a sales pitch kind of a video, wherein you have some artwork or these drawing hands that actually comes up and explains what the product does, right? Painted dough video again. This is an example where a company called Buffer. What they do is basically they manage your social media campaigns rather. So they will actually tweet on behalf of you at a particular point in time and day, right? You can actually schedule it. So when this idea actually came up, all they created was two screens. One, and they wanted to test whether the product is viable. Are people interested in it? So they just put a button called plans and pricing, which leads to the screen here down below saying that, oh, we are not ready, but we'll take your email and then notify you when we are ready. So they ran it for some time where they actually got a lot of hits on people who are actually interested in this kind of a product. What they did next was take one step further, right? They wanted to know how much would people be ready to pay, right? So they added additional screen which would actually kind of point from one place where you actually click plans and pricing to this screen which shows them different plans. They still didn't have the product ready. People click on this and they say, okay, we're not ready. But what this helped them do is, in a quick and fast fashion, they were able to validate whether the idea is good and what would be the pricing that most people would be ready to pay for it, right? What is the segment that they can actually go after? Wizard of Oz, again, I'll give an example. Again, you will see this example quoted in multiple articles everywhere. So Zappos is a shoe selling website which was operational, I think, on the same time as Amazon, right? So what they did was they created just a front-end website where they were selling shoes. The customers would come in, purchase the shoes. Zappos folks at Zappos would get the order. They would walk across the street, buy that particular shoes from the retail shop out there at the retail price, spend extra money on shipping and sending it off, right? So this is again at the time when online shopping had not picked up, and you're still validating whether people are comfortable buying shoes or not. So they did this for a couple of months while they did not have any of their supply chain mechanism, no warehouses on how would they actually buy the shoes, maintain the shoes, no deals with the shoe brands uh, for stocking the shoes in bulk or working out the rates, they were actually selling it at a loss. But if things did not go well, they could always just shut down and say that, okay, I spent some extra money in shipping the shoes, but pretty much I didn't burn a lot of money by setting up a entire supply chain ecosystem. A single feature product. So this I'll use an Indian example, a classic one, a unicorn at that, right? So Paytm, the way they started out, all that they actually offered was a mobile recharge product, right? So you could go into Paytm website and recharge your mobile. So this was a big back then. Again, you had to walk into a store to recharge your mobile, and providing this on a website, it provided convenience to people. So all they had was a website, no app, just a plain website where no app on Android or either on a phone, and this is all a single product or feature, core feature that they were actually offering. All right, so now we have chosen what type that we actually want to do, what type of experiment do we actually want to do, right? Depending again on our resources, on the timelines, what kind of a company that we have chosen an experiment type, right? So again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are more that you can actually look up and mix and match some of these particular experiments that you can actually do. But a few things that you would need to keep in mind, right? So while you run the experiment, continuously observe and collect data during the experiment, right? So you can't be like, I run an experiment, it's a experiment that will run for two weeks, and I will look at the data at the end of it, right? So you would want to kind of keep a close track on what is exactly happening with the experiment. You would want to identify if there are any potential risks that actually come up, something that might actually threaten your company or your brand, and you want to make plans to mitigate those such risks that might actually be arriving. You would want to define worst case scenarios where the scenario might be that you would just lose interest of your customer base with this particular idea. So you would want to kind of plan out on such things and plan to handle them as you run your experiment. So you should be in a position to decide that I need to call off this experiment as well, right? Again, we spoke about minimum criteria of success. We spoke about metrics, what we want to track, right? But it's not just enough that you actually collect only quantitative data. You should also be looking at qualitative data, right? So the idea here is that you marry the two, because you don't know why a particular data is acting in a certain fashion unless you get some qualitative analysis by talking to, say, your customers or users to get the bigger picture, right? And when you're actually done with your experiment, publish them, right? So you can start off with publishing your data from your experiment to your close circle of other PMs that you might have, so that they can spot any particular difference in what you actually derive from the data. But do publish out, even if it is, say, proving or disproving your hypothesis that you actually come up with. Okay. So when do you run experiments, right? So the answer is pretty simple, all the time, right? And this actually depends on, again, what stage of the product lifecycle you are at, right? So most of the ones that I actually covered was primarily, say, in the discovery phase, right? It's a new product or a feature or a product that you're deciding on what to build. But again, in cases where A/B testing or multivariance testing that you would use, frequent experimentation is something that you would want to do to optimize your feature product, get that extra 1 rupee out of your customer. That's what you're chasing after, right? Right. I'm nearing the end, actually. So what are the pitfalls and fallacies that usually affect an experiment, right? Running long experiments, right? So the experiments that you actually run should keep up with the Scrum cycles that you might actually have, right? So if it's a 2-week Scrum cycle that you actually have, it should be mapping up to that, so that your experimentation and the results that you get kind of feeds into that particular thing. And in a lean framework kind of a uh, VUCA world that we actually run are currently in, you want to fail safe and fail fast. Basically, test safe and test fast so that the results are actually there for the company to make use of, right? Uh, Second pitfall is running experiments with not enough users. So you need to choose your sample size of your users cautiously. It shouldn't be very small, where you're only talking to a few set of users, but you should come up with that particular number depending on the type of experiment that you're running and the type of uh, product that and the idea that you're actually going after. Not selecting proper metrics. So you would want to select metrics at the start itself while you have your hypothesis constructed and what are you actually going to do and what is the type of experiment that you actually are going to run. Because I mean, more often than not, you would I mean, if say you're not capturing, if you're an established company and you're not capturing that particular data at all, that you would need to kind of decide on what whether the experiment is a failure or a success if it's done as an afterthought. Designing experiments for scale. Again, don't go after the entire user population or the entire uh, implementation. You would want to like it kind of ties back to the point number one where you want to test safe and test fast basically. So building things for scale is not going to help you there. And a major pitfall, I think this is one of the major ones, basically treating invalidation of your hypothesis as a failure of your experiment. That's definitely not the case, right? So the idea is to kind of, I mean, you got to have a bit of a scientific mindset here, right? So and kind of be not emotionally attached to that particular idea here. You want to kind of treat it as a proper experiment, whether it was whether the hypothesis that you are testing, it is basically the hypothesis that failed or succeeded, not the experiment. So the experiment is always a success as long as you are in a position to say that the hypothesis failed or not, right? And another thing, which is more of a culture thing, is basically not sensitizing your stakeholders about experimentation, right? So it's very important that you actually manage your expectations with your management, with your sales. They shouldn't see your minimal product that you've actually built as something that is ready to go live, and they go ahead and promise the moon to your customers that we will actually do this in a day's time, when if it's not really something that you can't scale. So it's important that you actually sensitize that particular aspect, and also sensitize about the previous point, basically that an experimentation, the hypothesis can fail or not. So if you decide that you're not going to go after a particular idea, that is also good. It's not a waste of time. So what's the goal of product experimentation, right? So we spoke about how do we go about the process, and how do we actually kind of run through the process of experimentation. But what's the end goal, right? I think this is very important as product managers that we need to keep in mind. Is it's at the end of the day, what you want to deliver is better customer experience and better value to your users, right? So that's the end goal, and the process of experimentation helps you arrive at whether it is actually of value to your user or not. So that's, I think, pretty much what I had. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or mail me if you have any particular thoughts. I think we can take questions now. Ankita? Hello? Hello, Ankita, are you there? Hello, hello, hello. All right. For some reason, I'm not able to hear Ankita, but I believe I am audible. Uh, okay. So I guess I have the questions in front of me. I'll start answering one by one. Sorry for the technical difficulties. So I have Ahmed Singh who's asking me how to differentiate between product experimentation at budding phase versus product feature experimentation mature state. So I'm not sure if I got your question correctly, but you pretty much know where you're at, right? Whether it's a new feature that you are actually deploying or uh, something that you actually already have as a product that is built up and you're pretty much optimizing for it. On how do you actually take it ahead. Again, the type of experiment would actually vary, the kind of people that you would actually go after to do your experiment. So if you're a new product, you need to identify who your user set will be, who's your target customer, because you do not have an existing customer base. So therein lies your challenge on who should you target, how do you build that particular engagement with those customers. Whereas if say you're more in a uh, uh, I mean optimization phase where you actually want to get more out of your product, it's like multivariance testing or A/B testing is what you can actually call it and use. Uh, why metrics do you mean project? Targets or goals. So by metrics, I don't exactly mean targets or goals, because we did define what is the reason that I'm actually doing and what I am doing when we actually defined our hypothesis. By metrics, I actually mean what are you measuring it against? What tells you? Because it's not always that simple that whether a experiment is it's not binary in nature, whether it's a fail or a success. You need to kind of come up with what you're going after, right? So say if you are actually doing an A/B testing where you want people to click a particular button more, then clicks per user is what you would actually be going after to track that particular way. So that was from Stuti Gupta. Thanks for the question, Stuti. Which one of these techniques has been used most effectively at Innovati? Again, we are a B2B company where we actually give out payment solutions, technology solutions to offline merchants. But one, I mean, I think I did use an example. So Wizard of Oz is something that we actually use, right? So you do not want to invest in a particular new idea, building out the entire workflow in the backend, right? You expose something to the customer saying that, okay, this is what I want to try out. This is the UI. Do you like it or not? They start using it. And the backend, for all you know, it generates an email, which I'm not going to go into the specifics, but it is an established company, and a new thing that you actually bring up, you can very effectively use with things like Wizard of Oz. All right. During evaluation, how do we differentiate between whether an experiment needs to be dropped, or if, one minute, or during evaluation, how do we differentiate? So the question from Nagarajan is, during evaluation, how do we differentiate between whether an experiment needs to be dropped or it can benefit with a pivot? I'm not sure what you mean by during evaluation. If you are talking about the assumption phase, so I think we did walk through on what do you exactly want to uh, experiment, right? What are the assumptions? So you identify the riskiest one that you actually are assuming, basically the gunpowder in your idea, right? Which, if that particular assumption is not tested, you would actually fail, right? Or if, I mean, if I try to understand your question correctly, if you're referring to the last part wherein you're already in an experimentation phase, it is going on, how do you decide that it needs to be dropped off, right? So again, like I said, it is depending on risks that you are actually doing. So say you're actually running an email experiment which just goes to a landing page, right? So the experience is not that great, wherein you say that or a fake door experiment, right? So you say that the feature is available, the customer is excited clicking on it, he clicks, okay, I want to use this feature, buy now. He goes to a landing page which says, oh, we are not ready, right? So the experience is not smooth, right? And customers, with all the other options that might have, and with the competition that there is, somebody else might be providing that feature, and he'll be like, this product doesn't work, let me just move away, right? All right. Namrata Kanduri says hi. Hi. I think, okay. Uh, Painted doors sounded similar to clickbait. The customer can get disappointed. Is there anything that we need to keep in mind? Yes, definitely, right? So the painted door is pretty much a fake door kind of an experiment, right? So again, putting together different uh, things here, right? So for example, maybe you can actually, the landing page that the customer goes to, what you can do is put up a video that explains on what this is coming, right? Make them feel special, maybe that, okay, you are a chosen few set of users who will have early access to it if you register, right? That still kind of builds up hope. Again, it depends on what kind of a product that you're selling, right? So say a OnePlus mobile phones, when they launched, they were actually giving out these invites that you actually needed to have, and you had to you have to get an invite, wait for a few months to get hold of that phone, right? But people went through it although it was not ready, right? So do something like that, wherein it's a pre-order or a pre-registration that you can actually do as part of that. But again, the A flip side to it is that it depends on whether you're going ahead with your idea or not, right? So if you midway decide that this is not a good idea, and there are like uh, say you went out to about 20,000 users and 2,000 did sign up. Now, because you are abandoning your idea, you pretty much are not are losing out on the expectation of those 2,000 now. So you need to manage that. There's always that risk. How long should the experiment be run, and how do we determine the duration of the experiment? Question by Raj Shekhar. So like I said, right, so this should actually map up to your Scrum cycles, right? So it shouldn't be long. I would say at max about 4 weeks if it is a highly involved experiment, but otherwise shouldn't be more than 2 weeks when you actually take it out and look at the results pretty much at the end of the 2 weeks. Out suggestion. Okay. Okay. I think Sangeeta's questions is again same. What is the time length unto which an experiment must be carried out in an agile? I think okay. One last question: how to reach out to the end users and conduct research experimentation when it is a B2B product before getting buy-in from the customers? So I mean, we do that in a way, right? So the question is from Junaid Babu Rajaram. So the question is how to reach out to the end users and conduct experimentation when it is a B2B product, right? So uh, again, it's basically I mean, I'll tell you from example wherein we are a B2B, wherein we actually sell our solutions uh, to retailers and merchants, these billing POS, the payment POS solutions, where they actually interact with the customers, right? Now, all it takes me is to do my research. I would actually go in and stand at a store to kind of understand what the customer actually is doing and how is he actually operating, right? So that's one very basic way that you can actually get started with where how do you access that particular customer. It might be if you are in a B2B SaaS kind of a way. Yeah, I'm sure this is not exactly possible. You wouldn't know who is your end customers, but there are ways that you can actually kind of come up with. I think that's about what I had as questions as well. Uh, I think that's about it, Ankita. I still can't hear you, but I guess we are good. All right, thank you.